Of course. Okay, Erev Tov, everyone. So I thought we'll talk tonight. I hope much you won't get upset with me. Talk about a fascinating question of kashrut that comes up related to the kashrut of birds, the kashrut of turkeys. Talking about this today for no particular reason. There's no reason why. It just happens to be an interesting topic, and I thought we'll talk about it today for no particular reason. So it's very interesting when you look. By the way, I don't know if you know, the country with the number one consumption per capita of turkeys in the world is Israel. America is like not so close second. So we are, along with the many other things, we lead the world in eating turkeys. So the question of kashrut doesn't make sense, but that's what it is. But so it's very interesting when you look at animals. There are 4 different types of animals, broadly speaking, right? We look at land animals, fish, fowl, and insects, right? And each one of those has its own category, its own designation in terms of how we know whether it's kosher or not. Insects obviously are not kosher, right? With the exception perhaps of certain types of locusts, which the Temanim to this day still have the Masorah and still have the Simanim, and they will still consume those. If you are a non-Temani Jew, which many of you probably are, whether you can rely on that Masorah in order to eat locust, that is a point of machloket, that's a point of contention. There are some who say we can, some who say we can't, in any event. But that is that. When it comes to land animals, right, and when it comes to fish, in fact, so we know there are certain simanim. The Torah gives us simanim, fish and fins and scales, right? It doesn't give us an exhaustive list of which fish are kosher and which fish are not kosher. We look for the signs. Same thing with animals, which chew the cud and split hooves. If they have the signs, then they're kosher. They don't have the signs, they are not kosher. When it comes to fowl, when it comes to birds, it's very, very interesting because here the Torah goes in a completely different direction. The Torah, you look through the Chumash, it does not give us signs. There is no such thing as a siman from the Torah of a kosher bird. When we get to Chazal later on, we'll see that maybe there is a difference. But certainly in the Torah, there is no siman of a kosher bird. How do we know which birds are kosher and which are not? So the Torah gives us a list of the birds which are not kosher. There is a list. There are 24 species included in that list, right? And in truth, it's probably more correct to say that there's 24 categories rather than 24 specific species. And if you know that if you know what those 24 categories are, and yet the bird in question is not from one of those 24 categories, then it's kosher, right? Simple enough, right? Problem is, you have to know what those categories are. And already very, very early on, we're going back centuries already, we lost the tradition of knowing precisely how to define and how to translate what each of those groups are. In fact, to the extent that if you look in many of the translations of the Chumash, you look in Art Scroll, for example, and in Rav Hirsch, when he translates, you look at the section of all the non-kosher birds. So how do they translate them? They don't translate them. They just transliterate because nobody really knows exactly what they are. So that being the case, how are we able to eat birds at all? Right? I hope I'm not going to ruin your Friday night chicken soup. So it goes like this. So that is from the Torah. From the Torah, we simply have a list. No simanim, no indication. We have a list of the birds that are non-kosher. By process of elimination, we know what. Yeah. Okay, it's interesting. So somebody points out there, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, he translates them all. Okay, so he had. Does he say what that's based on, or what he has a? Okay. Okay. So could be. I don't know. The question is whether he would have said to rely on that halacha l'maaseh as well. That is another question. But okay. But let's go. So let's see how this going down the generation. So that is from the Torah. The list of the non-kosher birds and anything that's not there would be kosher. Now we get to Chazal. Right, we get to the Mishnah, Masechet Chulin, and here Chazal start to tell us that there are certain simanim. There are simanim by which you can identify whether a bird is kosher or non-kosher. The Mishnah and Chulin, it goes through the simanim of animals, the simanim of locusts as well. We won't talk about locusts today. But what does it say? So the Mishnah says, Simanei be'ema v'chaya ne'emru min Torah. Okay, so for be'ema and chaya, for land animals, we know the simanim are in the Torah. Okay. V'simanei ha'of lo ne'emru. and the simanim for a kosher bird was not given. Then came along Chachamim, right? V'amru Chachamim, and now the Mishnah gives us 4 simanim, gives us 1 negative siman and 3 positive simanim. Why would you give a negative siman? So again, it makes sense. If the Torah listed the categories of birds that are not kosher, so there must be a reason, there must be something. Seemingly, that's the most easily identifiable feature, right? And that's what Chazal understood. Chazal understood that when the Torah says these categories of birds are non-kosher, so they said, Amru Chachamim, Kol of adores tameh. Any of dores is non-kosher. Okay, colloquially translated as birds of prey. Although there is at least 4-way machloket in the Rishonim. I'm not going to go into all the technicalities, but there is at least 4-way machloket in the Rishonim. Exactly what does it mean of dores? Right. This is the difficulty when you have simanim. We have identifying features as to whether the bird is kosher or not, and we can't agree on what the feature is. So we're in a little bit of trouble. But essentially, we'll translate it for the purposes of this discussion. Translate it as birds of prey. Those are, if you know that it is a bird of prey, it is not kosher. Okay, and then the Mishnah lists another 3 simanim, which all kosher birds would have in common. Okay, so it says, Kol sheyesh lo etzba yitera, v'zefek, v'kuk v'anon niklaf tahor. Okay, I'm not going to go into now the translation of precisely what those simanim are, and how, because there as well, there are machlokot and disagreements, but essentially, Chazal tell us, there are 3 signs you know that a bird is kosher, and 1 sign, if it's an off dores, you know that it is not kosher. Okay. The next question is, now that Chazal have given us the simanim, okay, we can't rely on the translation, we can't rely on the list of the names of the birds in the Torah, because we don't know which species those are. But can we rely on the simanim? And if we see a bird that has that particular sima, or we see a bird that is not an off dores, let's look at the negative sign, right? We see a bird, we see that it's not a bird of prey, can we then rely on that in order to eat it? So the Gemara tells a very interesting story. And the Gemara says, originally, this is what they did. They relied on the siman, and the Gemara tells a story. It says, a couple of tapim later in the Gemara in Chulin, to the Mar of Papa, Tarnagola da Agma Asira, Tarnagolta da Agma Sharia. A certain type of bird called a Tarnagola or Tarnagolta, male or the female, of maybe 2 different species, that the one was not kosher, the one was kosher. It gives a very interesting way of remembering this. Gemara sometimes gives us simanim in order to remember things. So here it says the siman is amoni velo amonit. Okay, that's the pasuk. That's a halakha. We're not talking something completely different, but in order so that you can remember the amoni, the tarna gola, the agma, that is asur, and the amonit, the tarna gol to the agma shar. Okay, but whatever it is, the point is there was this type of bird. It was called the tarna gol to the agma, and that was held to be kosher. That was held to be permitted. And then what happened? And then they saw that this bird was actually a bird of prey. And they said, we're going to go now and catch all the pots. Because the bird which they'd held it to be a kosher species, actually turned out it was not. Rashi explains. Rashi says like this. He says, Mitoch, she'en anu bekiim bahem. We're no longer experts in the different species of birds, right? Nirali, the of haba lefanenu, Yesh lomar shema idros. Nowadays, we have to say, based on the story in the Gemara, says Rashi, our practice, there's already Rashi in the time, those are Rishonim, he says, if we see a bird, and we see that it's not a bird of prey, okay, but we have to say, Yesh lomar shema idros. Maybe we just haven't seen it yet, but we don't know. The hach tarnagota da agma, this bird, they said, hayu machzikin bateora. They assumed that it was not a bird of prey. They assumed it was a kosher species. And then they saw actually it was an off dores, and therefore, therefore says Rashi, the only way that we can eat a bird, the only way we can, how will we ever know that a bird is kosher? We have a masoret. We have that our grandparents ate it, and their grandparents ate it, and their grandparents ate it. Right. Going back, how far do we have to go back? It's going to be an interesting discussion. But we have a masoret that's passed down from generation to generation, that we know that this is a kosher bird. It's not that we suddenly saw it, we saw it somewhere, we watched it for a few days or for a few months, we saw it not off the rest, we said, okay, it's good. No, you have to have the masoret that it is. Right? V'shelo masru lanu yesh lachush. Uba masoret yesh lanu lismoch. That's what Rashi says. If we don't have the masoret, we have to be concerned that it may be. If we have the masoret, we can rely on it. So generally speaking, the birds that we hold to be kosher are birds that we have the masoret, that these are kosher animals. Now this halakha is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch, both by the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam. This is agreed by Ashkenazim and Sfardim. Some people think there is a misconception that the Shulchan Aruch does not require a Masoret on birds. That is not correct. The Shulchan Aruch writes, he says the following, in Siman Pei Bet, so he talks about all the different simanim that we have in the Mishnah, the simanim of birds, and then he says, even though you see a bird and it has all the simanim which you need, you still can't eat it. Because maybe it is a bird of prey, we just don't know. It's an off-dores, whatever that means. Unless you have a masoret that it's kosher, and then that's fine. Now, there is one exception. The Shulchan Aruch, he then says in the next siman that if a bird, he says, it has a very wide beak, it's like a duck, it has those certain, that is a clear indication. Right? He says, that would be a clear indication that it's not an off-dores, and you can eat it, so long as it has the other simanim. Okay, so there is a slight leniency of the Shulchan Aruch, but the Ramah says, even in that, he says, there are those who say, even that we cannot rely on, and it's only if you actually have the Masoret that you would be able to eat it. He says, and that is the minhag, and we should not change from that. Okay, so based on all of the above, it seems pretty clear, and it's pretty black and white case of halakha, how it goes. A few centuries ago, a new bird is discovered known as the turkey. The truth is, even in the name of this bird, you understand how much confusion there was. In English, it's called a turkey. In Hebrew, it's called a tarnagol hodu, right? Why? Why is it called? That's not what the turkeys are saying right now. But why is it called that? Because there was and in many other languages as well, the name of the turkey is related to Hodu, is related to India, because it was a misunderstanding in Europe. They thought that this bird had come from India, and that was why they called it the Indian chicken, right, or the Indian hen in different languages. In England, they thought it came from Turkey, and that's why they called it turkey. It probably came more from Mexico or somewhere else. But that is the name of the bird. So then the question is, how can we have a Masoret in the time when these halachot were written, the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, the Gemara? Nobody had ever heard of turkeys. Nobody had ever seen them. We can't have a Masoret for it. So nowadays you have this new bird. There's no Masoret, and everybody's eating it. How can it be kosher? And that's why there are certain people, okay, few and far between, but there are those who have a stringency not to eat turkey. Nonetheless, the Minhag Yisrael, and just about every kashrus agency that I'm aware of certifies turkey, right? And we hold it to be turkey. And all the poskim saying, even those who have the chumrah may have the chumrah for themselves, but they would not. They wouldn't say it for other people. Nobody would say that it's outright not kosher. The question is, why is the turkey kosher, and how is the turkey kosher? Where does the Masoret come from? There's no Masoret, so you can't. So there are all sorts of. I saw an article that was published a couple of days ago that gave 11 reasons or 11 different explanations. We won't go through them all, but 11 different explanations as to why we can eat turkey. Some of them are very, very serious suggestions that are put forward by the poskim. Some of them are a little bit less convincing, shall we say. There are those who say that, for example, the Jews of India had a Masoret, that the turkey was kosher, tarnagol hodu. The problem with that is that it didn't actually come from India. So whether the Jews of India had a Masoret or not is completely irrelevant. Right? There are those who say that the Indians in America were from the 10 lost tribes and they had a Masoret. Okay, so maybe not. There are those who question whether we need the Masoret at all. They say maybe this is a sign that we don't hold like the stringency of the Ramah, or that we only hold like the Shulchan Aruch. Again, it's a difficulty because the Shulchan Aruch also says you need the Masoret. So it's very, very strange, and it's very, very confusing. And it's one of those cases where the question is probably better than any answer that we'll give. But it's one of those cases whereby we say, Minhag Yisrael's Torah. This is the minhag that has been established over many generations, and the Netziv actually gives a fascinating answer to this. And all of the answers as to why we can eat the turkey are coming to justify the minhag now, are not, if a new bird was to be discovered tomorrow, for argument's sake, this would not hold. We can't start it now. But once it's already been started, maybe that's a different situation. I don't know how they. Yeah.
In Israel, one looked at it and said, "Yeah, it's just a big chicken."
What, 300 years ago?
Yeah. Then went all
maybe so. I don't know. So look. I've seen I have seen the suggestion written. There are those who say that the turkey is part of the chicken family. Again, that's not correct. But there are those who say, and therefore chicken's kosher, the turkey's kosher. What the Netziv says essentially, he says you need a Masoret. He says we have a Masoret. He says we eat turkeys. Why? Because our grandparents ate turkeys, and their grandparents ate turkeys, and their grandparents ate. And there's a Masoret that's been going on for generation after generation. That it's a kosher bird. Where did that start from? How did that start? That we don't know, and that's not so clear. What we do know is that we've seen over many generations it is not an off-dores. If we were suddenly to find evidence that the turkey, I don't think we would. If we were suddenly to find evidence that turkey is an off-dores, then we'd have trouble. But that seems to be that's what the Netziv says. Again, how did it start, and how is that? How did that come about? That we don't know. But that is the minhag now, and that's the accepted minhag Yisrael. And that's so. If you are going home and having a turkey, לסופה, בתי רבי חנניה בן הקשה אומר, יצא הקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות את ישראל, לפרח הבא להם תורה מצוות, שנאמר דרך וצמן צדקו, יגדיר תורה ויד.